By daylight, Glen Caldwell belonged to fences. He moved along them the way some men moved through church aisles, steady, familiar, and with a private kind of reverence. At first light, he rode a dust-caked bay mare named Cricket along the Caldwell acreage in the breaks west of Burnett, checking for sagging wire, busted posts, and spots where hogs had rooted under the lower strand. Cedar and live oak quilted the hills in dark clumps, and the limestone showed through in pale ribs where rainwater had bitten channels down the slopes. In spring, the grass came up green and soft for about 3 weeks before the heat turned it brittle and mean again. Glen liked the hour before full sun, when the ranch still sounded half asleep, cattle lowing from a draw, a windmill creaking, a dove somewhere in a mesquite. He kept his brim low, one hand on the horn, and spoke out loud to the horse now and then, even if nobody was there to hear it. "Easy, girl. We'll get you water after the south line." His voice was rough from coffee and dust, but calm. Most things in his life were built on that calm: get up, check stock, patch whatever had failed overnight, come in by late morning, catch a short sleep before the mill. Repeat. His trailer sat on a scraped patch of hard ground near the eastern edge of the family land, close enough that when the sawmill ran he could hear the blade whine through the cedar breaks, like something metallic crying in the distance. The trailer was older than his son, with aluminum siding gone dull and a door that stuck in humid weather. Glen had fixed the plumbing with parts from 3 different hardware stores and kept a spare generator on cinder blocks beside the steps. A porch light hung over the entry, yellow and weak, but it cut a small island in the dark. By dusk, he traded saddle leather for steel-toe boots and diesel machinery. The logging contract had been good enough that he'd stayed with it after the divorce, splitting days between ranch work and nights at the Caldwell mill yard. It wasn't a big operation, just enough to process local cedar and oak, fill trailer loads, and keep a handful of families paid when weather cooperated. Graveyard shift was 3 men most nights: Glen on loader and yard checks, Ray Tinsley on saw feed, and Dwayne Mercer foremaning from a rolling office trailer with a radio that always had static in it. He and Ray had played defensive line together in high school, though now Ray had a belly and bad knees and laughed like he was trying to cough up nails. Dwayne was older by 10 years and treated every complaint as weakness, unless it came from him. "Clock's clock, boys," Dwayne liked to say, tapping his watch like it was scripture. "Wood doesn't care if you're tired." Before Glen left for each shift, he made one call from his trailer kitchen, leaning against the counter while the microwave clock blinked 12 o'clock, because he still hadn't reset it after an outage. His ex-wife, Marissa, usually answered on the 3rd ring. "You on your way?" she'd ask. 10 minutes, he'd say. "How's Eli?" Still awake because somebody fed him chocolate milk after supper. Glen would smile despite himself. That was strategic. He had spelling. "He's 7, Glen. Everything is strategic to you." He'd hear their son in the background. "Dad? Dad, did you see my frog trap?" And for 30 or 40 seconds, the whole life he used to have would rush up close enough to hurt. He kept the calls short, because short was easier on both of them. "Tell him Saturday morning, if you're still good with it," he'd say. "I'm good with it," Marissa would answer. "Daytime, Glen." Always that word. Daytime. As if she needed to nail the sun down with syllables. "Daytime," he'd agree and hang up. Then thermos, keys, flashlight, Notebook-sized stack of work orders folded in his back pocket and out into the dry cedar smell. At the mill yard, sodium lights painted everything a tired amber. Stacks of logs lay like sleeping animals beside the haul road. The loader coughed black smoke at startup, then settled into its heavy diesel thrum. Resin and hot oil made a smell you could taste in your teeth. Glenn liked machines because they obeyed force and maintenance. If something failed, there was a reason. Bolt fatigue, cracked line, operator error. You found it, fixed it, moved on. He'd learned to run on little sleep-in habits, top off fluids, walk the perimeter once before midnight, check the gate chain, keep the radio volume low enough to hear the yard. Don't turn your back to moving equipment. Don't drink the last of the coffee before 2. Most nights the hill country talked to itself around them. Coyotes yipped from ridge to ridge. Cicadas buzzed in waves so thick they felt electric. Sometimes feral hogs snorted in the brush near the back fence, and Ray would slap the side of the saw feed and say, "There's your overtime, boys." It was loud work in a loud place. Glenn preferred it that way. The first odd thing arrived by subtraction. It was a Wednesday, moon not quite half, low cloud moving fast from the west. Glenn was in the loading yard, nudging a cedar stack into line when he realized the coyotes had stopped. Not faded out. Stopped. 1 second they were carrying on somewhere beyond the north pasture. The next there was a hole where the sound should have been. He lifted off the throttle and listened through the idling engine. Nothing. Then, as if some unseen hand had turned a knob, the cicadas cut out too. "Ray, you hearing this?" Glenn said into the handheld. Static. Then Ray, "Hearing what? Your romantic silence?" Everything's dead quiet. "Praise God," Ray said. "Maybe we can hear ourselves think." Glenn snorted and set the parking brake. He climbed down, boots hitting packed dust, and stood in the wash of the loader lights, facing the tree line across from the loading yard. Juniper, scrub oak, and cedar made a black wall there. The air felt thicker than it had 10 minutes earlier, like storm pressure without rain. That's when the knocking came. 3 hollow strikes from the dark, each one spaced neat and deliberate. Knock, knock, knock. A pause long enough to count to 4, then 2 more. Knock, knock. He stayed still, head angled, waiting for it to repeat. Wind moved over the yard and rattled loose tin on a parts shed, but the trees themselves barely stirred. "Dwayne," he said into the radio, "you got anybody out by the east fence?" "Negative," Dwayne answered. "Why?" "Something knocking in the trees." "A beat." "Probably a branch." "Branches don't keep time." "Everything keeps time if you're tired enough. Keep moving wood." Glenn waited another minute. Nothing. He walked halfway across the yard with his flashlight and put the beam into the cedar brake. Dust motes and pollen drifted through the cone of light. Beyond 20 yards, it swallowed black. No eyeshine, no movement, no trespassers in camo trying to be funny. He went back to work. The next night, same hour, same side of the yard. This time he heard it while checking chains on a log truck staged for morning haul. Knock, knock, knock. Pause. Knock, knock. Measured heavy, not loud enough to be machinery and too deep to be woodpecker tapping. Glenn crossed the yard and flashed the tree line again, sweeping low first for feet or reflected shoe stripes. Nothing. He walked the fence to the corner post, cussing softly when barbed wire caught his sleeve, and found only old hog tracks, hardened in mud from last week's rain. "Somebody's screwing with us," he told Ray when they took 5 near the fuel tank. Ray blew into his coffee and shrugged. "Then they're committed. You hear all the weird echoes out here. Mill noise bounces off them ridges and comes back sounding like God knocking on your door. God's got rhythm problems then." Ray laughed. "You need sleep, brother." By the 3rd night, Glenn hadn't told Marissa about the knocking. He didn't have language for it that didn't sound childish, and childish was the last thing he could afford in those conversations. Instead, he asked about Eli's math worksheet, promised Saturday pickup, and drove out under a yellow moon with his jaw tight for no reason he could name. Around 11:30, he swung by his trailer before shift to grab a forgotten pair of gloves. The Caldwell ranch dogs, 2 heelers and an old cur mutt that belonged to nobody and everyone, usually met his truck in a barking wave. Tonight they were on the porch under the weak light, pressed close enough that their shoulders touched. They did not come down. "Come on then," Glenn called, slapping his thigh. The blue heeler whined and lowered its tail. All 3 stared past him into the cedar beyond the trailer, noses up, ears pinned forward hard enough to look painful. Glenn turned and followed their gaze. Black brush, uneven moonlight, wind lifting dust off the road. Then from out there, farther than the porch light reached and close enough he felt it in his teeth. Knock, knock, knock. Pause, knock, knock. The old mutt gave a short, choking bark and backed into the screen door so hard it banged the frame. Glenn stood with his gloves in one hand and watched the dark until his eyes watered. He told himself branch, told himself bored kids, told himself somebody had rigged a loose gate to slap in the wind. He finished his shift anyway, kept the loader moving, checked mirrors more than he used to. On Friday afternoon, after 4 hours of broken sleep, he started looking for proof. He took a mag light, a tape measure, and a canteen, and walked the east fence line from the loading yard to the old limestone culvert. Midday heat came off the ground in shimmers. Grasshoppers clicked out of his path. If somebody had been trespassing nights, they'd leave signs eventually. Boot prints, crushed cans, cigarette butts, fresh ATV tread. Human beings were bad at not leaving themselves behind. At first he found nothing except hog rooting and deer scat. Then 40 yards inside the cedar break, where the ground rose toward the ridge, he found the first scar. An oval impact in a live cedar trunk at about chest height on him, bark stripped clean to pale wood beneath, edges wet and stringy like it had happened recent. Not a scrape, an impact, as if something hard had been driven straight in and pulled back out. He touched it with 2 fingers. Sap stuck to his skin. 10 minutes later he found a second mark on a different tree, same height, same oval shape. A third stood near the fence corner, this one deeper, with dark fibers of bark mashed inward. Glenn stepped back and looked from one to the next, trying to draw a line in his head. Too uniform for antlers, too deep for thrown rocks, too high for hogs by a mile. He went to the office trailer before shift and showed Dwayne photos on his phone. Dwayne squinted, then handed it back. Tree damage. From what? Could be anything. Storm debris. Cattle rubbing. Cattle don't get in that break, and a storm didn't hit one spot 3 times. Dwayne leaned back in his chair, boots on a milk crate. You've been pulling doubles and babysitting cows in between. That catches up. Night makes everything spooky. Drink less coffee. Glenn left before he said something that would cost him work. Ray was kinder about it, but not by much. He studied the photos and rubbed his neck. "Man, I don't know," he said. "Could be echoes in your brain filling in the rest. We're all jumpy at 2 a.m. Echoes don't peel bark." "No, but tired men do weird math." Glenn bought a pocket notebook at the co-op on his way home and started logging every incident like he was documenting fence repairs. Date, time, weather, moon phase, wind direction, sound description, duration, location. He wrote in block letters with a carpenter pencil and kept the notebook in his shirt pocket, where sweat could soak it but not erase it. Night 1 logged, 11:47 p.m., silence event before knocks. Night 2, 12:11 a.m., repeat pattern east line. Night 3, 11:36 p.m., dogs refuse yard, pattern close to trailer. Night 4, 12:03 a.m., 2 cycles, no visual. Writing it down steadied him. Facts were better than fear. A week into it, fog rolled in, low off the creek beds, and sat on the yard like breath. Not common for that time of year, but not impossible either. It blurred the edges of everything beyond the first row of logs and made the sodium lights look smeared. Glenn hated fog at the mill. It flattened distance and made machinery seem closer than it was. At 1:54 a.m., he idled the loader near the loading lane and checked his watch. No knocks yet. No coyotes for almost an hour. Even the insects sounded thin. "Ray, you got eyes on the east stack?" he radioed. "Barely got eyes on my own hands," Ray answered. "Why?" Glenn didn't answer. He reached up and killed the loader floodlights. Dark rushed in, thick and immediate. The mill yard dropped to silhouettes and faint orange spill from the office trailer. His own breathing sounded too loud inside the cab. At first he saw only fog shifting between trunks. Then 2 points appeared in the tree line, red gold and steady, about 8 feet off the ground, and farther apart than any deer he'd ever lit up. Not glowing by themselves, reflecting, like eyes caught in angled light from the yard, but wrong in the spacing, wrong in the height. He leaned forward, one hand on the key, and the points brightened, then dimmed, as if whatever held them had turned its head a fraction. They did not blink. "Ray," Glenn whispered into the radio, though there was no need to whisper. "I got eyes east side. High." "Whose?" "Don't know." The points vanished. Before he could decide whether they dipped, turned, or simply gone out, the knocking started again. Same measured rhythm, but now from 10 yards left of where the eyes had been. Knock, knock, knock. Pause, knock, knock. Something in the fog moved with weight. Not seen exactly, but registered. A shift in gray behind the juniper. A pressure change that made the hair on Glenn's forearms rise under his sleeves. Predatory was the only word his body offered him. Old as bone and clear as a siren. He hit the floodlights back on so fast the switch snapped under his thumb, and the tree line stood empty in hard white glare. "From the radio," Ray said, voice no longer joking. "Glenn?" Glenn kept staring at the place where the eyes had hung. "Yeah. What was that?" He swallowed once, wrote the time on a grease-smudged scrap with shaking fingers, and answered the only true thing he had. "It's close." "It's close." Static hissed for half a second, then Ray said, "You want me to come out there?" Glenn kept his eyes on the cedar wall. Floodlights flattened every trunk and limb into hard silver white, but the place where those 2 points had floated looked no different than the rest now. Just fog and brush, and a narrow strip of trampled grass by the fence. His mouth tasted like penny metal. "Yeah," he said. "Bring your light." Ray arrived in the side-by-side, engine whining high, spotlight shaking in his hand. He tried to make a joke out of it when he climbed down. "What are we hunting, Dracula?" Glenn didn't laugh. "You heard the knocks move?" Ray's smile thinned. "I heard something." They crossed the yard together, boots sinking slightly in damp dust, and stopped 10 feet short of the fence. Fog moved between the strands like smoke. Glenn swept his mag light left to right, low first, then up through the limbs. Nothing reflected back. "Could have been a cow eye on the ridge," Ray said. 8 feet up? Could have been slope." "There ain't enough slope for that." Ray scratched his beard and looked toward the office trailer. "You gonna tell Dwayne we shut down to chase ghost deer?" Glenn clicked off his light, listened, and caught only the far belt noise from inside the mill building. No knocks now, no insects either. He said, "I'm walking it." "You're what?" "Fence line now." Ray blew out a breath that fogged in the beam. "Fine, 10 minutes. Then I'm going back before Dwayne chews both our asses." They walked the east line from corner post to culvert, sweeping for tracks. The ground was hard in most places, packed by tires and dry weeks. But in a low patch where runoff sat after storms, Glenn found 3 fresh depressions in the thin mud, too long for deer, too narrow for hog, each one with a dragged crescent at the front like claws or split nail tips. Not clean prints, just pressure marks, ambiguous enough for anybody who wanted ambiguity. Ray crouched, squinted, and straightened again. "Dog, maybe. Biggest dog in Burnett County." Ray shrugged because he didn't have to name it if he wouldn't. They found 2 new bark scars before they hit the culvert. Bright sap wet down the trunks. One scar still held a curled flap of bark, hanging like peeled skin. Back in the yard, Dwayne met them halfway to the loader, arms folded, yellow office light framing his shoulders. "What are we doing, a nature walk?" he said. Glenn held up his phone with the photo open. "Fresh damage in the brake, and tracks." Dwayne glanced, uninterested. "Hogs rub trees all the time." "At 6 feet?" Dwayne's jaw set. "You shut down operations without clearance again. You can finish the week at home. I'm not losing production because you and Ray heard knocking." Ray lifted both hands. "I didn't hear nothing but Glenn being dramatic." Glenn turned toward him, betrayed rising hot and quick. Ray wouldn't hold his gaze. Dwayne pointed toward the loader. "Get back in the cab, both of you. This ain't a campfire story outfit." Glenn climbed in and finished the shift. But the routine had gone brittle. Every time he reversed, he checked the tree line first. Every time the belts clanked or a log dropped wrong, he flinched. At 4:12 a.m., with dawn still an hour out, the knocking came once more from deep right of the yard. 3, pause 2, and Dwayne didn't acknowledge it over radio, even though all 3 men went quiet at the same time. By noon, Glenn was too wound up to sleep. He drove into town, stopped at the feed store, and asked the old man at the counter if anyone had seen a black bear that season. The man snorted. "Around here? You reading magazines again?" "Just asking." "Game Cam catches one every few years out west. Never this close. Why?" "Something's hitting trees on our side." "Woodpecker." "Woodpecker with a sledgehammer?" The old man looked up from his invoice, then really looked at him. "You boys got feral dogs?" "Sometimes." "Pack dogs'll make all manner of racket at night. Seen 'em run calves till their tongues split. Call animal control if they show." Glenn thanked him and left with nothing useful. He asked a deputy he knew by sight at a gas pump. "Hey, Chut," the deputy listened, chewing sunflower seeds and offered mountain lion as a possibility. In the same tone, he might suggest changing spark plugs. Glenn asked if mountain lions knocked trees in measured patterns. The deputy spat into the gravel and said, "Everything sounds weird in the dark, Glenn." At home, he walked the trailer perimeter in broad daylight and found a fresh strike on a live oak 20 yards from his steps. Chest high on him, oval, deep. He stood there with his hand against the wound in the bark and felt stupid for feeling afraid at 1 in the afternoon. That evening he bought 2 cheap motion lights, a box of nails, and mason twine. He rigged tin scraps and old sockets to the twine along the back fence, so anything pushing through would rattle them. He dusted one section of open ground with flour from a torn pantry bag, smooth as cake icing, and set his spare phone on a milk crate facing the cedar break with a recording app running. At 2:07 a.m., something knocked from beyond the flour line. By 2:15, the recording app had captured 5 clean cycles and a full minute of his own breathing. In the morning, the flour sat mostly untouched, except for one broad smudge at the far edge, as if a burlap sack had dragged across and lifted away. No paw pads, no hoof splits, no boot treads. He played the audio for Ray before shift. The knocks came through crisp and hollow, each interval nearly identical. Ray listened with his head tilted, then handed back the phone. "That could be anything on tape," he said. "Could be you beating on a post." "You think I did this to myself?" Ray rubbed his eyes. "I think we're all tired and Dwayne's on edge, and if you keep pushing this, he'll bounce you." "Did you hear it last night?" A long pause. Then Ray looked away and said, "No." Glenn stopped asking him for a while after that. He asked everyone else. A neighbor 2 parcels over said he'd heard some big wood knocks near his deer blind and blamed teenagers. A line crew guy claimed it was probably old cedar trunks, popping as they cooled after hot days. A retired game warden told him over black coffee that if it was a bear, it'd leave scat you couldn't mistake. And if it was people eventually got drunk enough to be seen. Glenn kept walking the fence, kept finding scars, kept logging times. He added columns in the notebook. Animal sounds before event, wind speed estimate, direction of knocks relative to yard lights. Pattern built itself in pencil whether he liked it or not. Silence first. Then knocks. Then movement just outside illumination. Never while the yard sat fully dark. Never while 2 men stood in the same spot for long. Always east side, sometimes near his trailer. Never touching open ground. He told himself it was a man with a maul trying to scare them for fun. He told himself it was a bear standing to strike. He told himself it was a damaged cottonwood limb swinging against trunks in rhythm. Then came another fog night, thicker than the first, and denial got harder to hold. The mill had gone down for 20 minutes near 1:30 because a feed chain jumped sprocket. Belts quieted, blades stilled, and sudden silence spread over the yard, so complete Glenn could hear fuel ticking in the loader tank. Dwayne and Ray were inside the maintenance bay cursing at bolts. Glenn sat in the cab, engine idling low, watching gray fog slide over stacked cedar like surf over rocks. At 1:58 a.m., he checked his watch without meaning to. At 1:59, he reached up and turned off the loader lights again. "Don't do this," he muttered at himself, as if saying it made it scientific. Dark gathered, and for 5 heartbeats he saw nothing except faint orange from the office trailer and the weak beam bleeding under the maintenance bay door. Then, between 2 junipers across the fence, The eyes appeared. Same red-gold reflect, steady and level. Same impossible spacing. This time he had a better angle, and the height hit him harder. Well above top wire, nearly even with the lowest fork of a live oak branch he'd stood under 100 times. His fingers tightened on the steering wheel until his knuckles hurt. The points did not blink. He clicked the radio on with his thumb. "Ray, you in bay?" "Yeah, chain's back on. Why?" "Come out quiet, no lights." "You serious? Just come out." He watched the eyes brighten slightly, then fade like polished stones turning in a hand. A shape behind them blocked a thin strip of fog, not enough to define body, just density and absence that moved where air should have moved. Ray's boots hit gravel behind him. "Where?" Glenn pointed without taking his own eyes off target. "There." Ray leaned against the cab step and squinted into the dark. "I don't see—" Knock, 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 pause, knock, knock. The sound came from 15 yards left. Ray jerked his head toward it instinctively, then back. The eyes were gone. "You saw that," Glenn said. "I saw reflection," Ray answered, but his voice cracked on the word. "Could be 2 critters. Stacked 8 feet up. Fog messes depth." Another movement threaded through brush. Not a run. A glide, side on and smooth, with no branch snap to match the weight it implied. Glenn snapped the floodlights on. The trees stood empty and ordinary. Fog burned white in the beams. Ray swore softly. Okay, that's not funny." Glenn climbed down, almost slipped, and crossed to the fence with light and radio both shaking in his hand. He played the beam through trunks, over roots, into every hollow and cedar crotch he could reach. He found a fresh gouge in a deadfall limb. Wood fibers crushed inward, and beside it, 2 gray hairs snagged on bark. Coarse, longer than dog fur. He pinched them into a sandwich bag from his lunchbox. By the time Dwayne stomped out, demanding to know why the yard lights were strobing on and off, both men were breathing hard like they'd run. "Tell him," Glenn said to Ray. Ray stared at the ground. "Thought I saw eyes, probably deer." Dwayne made a disgusted sound. "You two trying to build a haunted house attraction?" Glenn stepped toward him. "There's something in that break, and it ain't deer." "Then call animal control and ask for a priest, too." Dwayne jabbed a finger toward the bay. "Get the chain test done and quit inventing problems." Glenn held up the bagged hairs. "Found this." Dwayne didn't even look. "Could be from your jacket." Ray flinched but said nothing. Later on break, Glenn went to his truck, sat with the dome light off, and replayed what he'd seen frame by frame in his head until each version contradicted the last. Maybe it was 2 owls on a branch. Maybe a pair of reflectors on illegal dump trash. Maybe fog refraction bouncing from the office light through wet leaves. Every rational explanation demanded geometry that didn't fit. But he still stacked them anyway, one on top of another, like boards over a hole. At 3:11 the knocking came again, farther out, and he wrote in the notebook with cramped block letters, "Eyes present 2 minutes before knock. Height est 8 feet. No blink." Under that he wrote, harder, splitting the paper, "Likely misread distance in fog." He underlined likely twice, then closed the book. For 6 days nothing happened except the usual knocks and silence. That almost made it worse. Routine returned enough that Dwayne started smirking again and calling the east line Glenn's ghost pasture. Ray laughed when Dwayne did, but too quickly, and he avoided working that side alone after midnight. A dry storm built on the 7th night, heat lightning without rain, wind from the west, carrying dust and ozone. By 10 p.m., The horizon kept flashing. Not bright enough to throw shadows at first. Just little internal flickers behind cloud layers. The hair on Glenn's forearms stayed lifted for no reason. Around 12:40, he was on the loader near the Hall Road, positioning a cedar pile. Wind gusted through the brakes, warm and erratic, and every few minutes, lightning opened the sky in white sheets that showed ridge lines and then took them away. "Power might blip," Dwayne said over radio. "Keep machines clear." "Copy," Glenn answered. At 12:53, with the loader facing east, he heard the pattern again from the tree line. Knock, 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 pause, knock, knock. Not loud. Deliberate. He froze with one hand on the joystick. A lightning sheet tore across the western cloud bank and backlit the ridge for maybe half a second. In that half second, something stood at the tree edge where no tree had been. An upright mass broad at the shoulders, narrow through the waist, head level above the top wire by a full head, maybe more. Dark on pale sky, no detail, just proportion, then black again. Glenn's breath stopped. His foot slipped off the pedal and found it again. "Ray," he said into radio, voice thin. "You looking east?" "Negative, I'm on feed. Look east now." Another flash, weaker. The shape had shifted 10 yards right without crossing open ground, still just inside shadow, moving with a lateral step too smooth for something that size. Not a bound. Not a deer hop. A side glide that kept shoulders level. Ray's voice came back strained. "I see something." "What?" "Could be 2 trees. Hard to tell in this light." Lightning cracked closer, loud enough to thump Glenn's chest. For an instant, the whole yard lit blue-white, and he saw it again. Clearer in edge, if not in detail, upper body thick and deep. Arms hanging longer than looked right. Head pushed forward from the shoulders. It stood still during the flash, then when darkness fell, he heard brush shift and felt, rather than saw it, pacing the line where sodium spill ended. He keyed the radio twice, forgot words, tried again. "It knows the light boundary." "What?" "It's staying at the edge." Dwayne cut in, irritated. "Who's tying up channel with nonsense? We've got weather." Glenn ignored him. He backed the loader 2 lengths to widen distance, kept floodlights trained on the nearest break, and waited for movement. Wind hit, dropped, hit again. Cedar branches hissed. No eye shine this time. Just that pressure in his ribs that said something alive and watching stood inches outside certainty. 3 more knock cycles came over the next 15 minutes, each from a slightly different point along the tree line, like it was walking and testing trunks as it moved. Ray came out of the mill and stood under the awning, refusing to step farther into the yard. "You seeing it now?" "No." "Me neither." Lightning flashed behind the ridge once more, and the silhouette appeared farther upslope than before. Profile turned half-side. High shoulder line. Tucked middle. Then a slope down through the back like a hyena stretched into the wrong dimensions. It took one step that covered more ground than should have been possible without a run-up, then dissolved into trees before the after-image faded from Glenn's eyes. He realized he'd been holding his breath long enough that his vision tunneled. He forced air in, tasted diesel and storm dust. Dwayne came out then, looked where both men pointed, saw nothing, and called them idiots in a flat, tired voice. "It's brush and lightning. You want to clock out because clouds are scary. Do it now and don't come back." Ray muttered, "Told you." To no one. Glenn didn't answer. He kept working because work was the only thing that made his hands steady. But every few minutes, He caught himself staring at the light edge, waiting for that impossible shoulder line to resolve again. By shift end, the storm had moved east without dropping a single good rain. Dawn came pink and ordinary over the pasture, mocking all of it. At the trailer, Glenn sat on the bottom step with his boots still on and opened the notebook. He logged times, flash intervals, estimated positions. He drew a crude outline in the margin. Broad top, narrow middle, long arms. Then he scratched a question mark through it until the paper tore. Inside, he washed his face at the sink and looked at himself in the mirror above the medicine cabinet. Red eyes, stubble, jaw clenched so tight a muscle jumped near his ear. "Lightning and trees," he said to his own reflection. He tried it again, firmer, like repetition could make it true. "Lightning and trees, that's all?" He stood there until the hot water ran cold, repeating it under his breath, and did not quite believe himself. He slept for maybe 90 minutes in broken strips and woke each time to the same imagined sound. Wood struck in a measured pattern somewhere past the trailer wall. By late afternoon, heat sat heavy over the ranch, pressing cedar smell flat against the ground. Glenn saddled Cricket, checked the south fence on autopilot, and found himself stopping to stare at every stand of juniper, as if expecting shoulders to unstack from shadow. Nothing moved except doves and one mule deer that blew and bounded off through shin oak. Ordinary. Mockingly ordinary. At 6:30, he called Marissa from the trailer sink while pulling on his work shirt. "You sound tired," she said before hello. "Didn't sleep much." Again? A pause, and "You still working nights this weekend?" "Yeah." "You promised Eli Saturday morning." "I'll make it." He glanced out the kitchen window toward the cedar break behind the trailer. "Daytime, I know." She let that sit a second, then softened. "You okay, Glenn?" He almost said no. Almost told her he'd started timing silences and talking himself out of what his own eyes had seen. Instead, he said, "Just long week," and listened to Eli shout in the background about a frog trap until his chest hurt for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. The mill yard looked sharper than usual when he arrived, every edge hard under sodium light, as if the air had been scrubbed. Ray was already there on the side-by-side, checking a tire with a boot heel. He raised a hand, not quite meeting Glenn's eyes. "You still seeing monsters?" Ray asked. "You still pretending you didn't?" Ray made a face. "I'm pretending Dwayne signs my paycheck." Dwayne stepped out of the office trailer with a clipboard and a rainless storm forecast, printed from somewhere, giving instructions in his usual clipped tone. "Keep Hall Lane clear. Rotate stacks. Chain up the service gate after midnight." He never said a word about the East Line. Neither did Glenn. Not out loud. The first knocking came at 11:21 before the usual dead hour. Knock, 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 pause, knock, knock. Glenn felt it through the loader seat as much as heard it. An impact thud transmitted through ground and frame. He keyed his radio. "East fence again." No answer from Dwayne. Only saw noise and a faint curse from inside the mill building. Ray came on a moment later. "Heard it. Come outside." Ray stepped into the yard under the awning light, looked toward the trees, then back at the open mill door like a man checking exits. "You want to do another walk? We do it fast." "Not on foot." Glenn was already climbing down. "Get the side-by-side, flood bar on full." Ray hesitated, then nodded once and swung into the seat. The little engine kicked over with a mosquito whine, that sounded insultingly small against the dark ahead. Glenn climbed in beside him, maglite in one hand, handheld radio clipped high on his vest. They rolled toward the east service lane, tires crunching dry gravel, and passed through the break in stacked cedar where the yard lights thinned into yellow streaks. Behind them, the mill kept running, a blanket of machinery noise that faded as they moved out. Ahead, cedar and scrub oak knitted tight along the fence. Branch tips reached through barbed wire like fingers. "Keep it slow," Glenn said. Ray snorted, trying for old bravado. "Slow is all she does uphill." They crawled parallel to the fence, flood bar throwing a hard white tunnel through drifting dust. Trunks jumped from black to glare and back. Glenn swept the maglite into every pocket of shadow the bar light missed. He could smell hot electrical insulation from the flood bar and raw resin from cut cedar piles. The knocking sounded again, closer and to their right now, from inside a pocket of scrub where the fence bent. Knock, 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 pause, knock, knock. Ray braked instinctively. The side-by-side rocked and idled high. "Back up?" he asked, voice thin. "Hold." Glenn stood half out of the seat to get a better angle, leaned the maglite beam through two scrub oaks, and something moved across that slice of light, low and fast, not away but lateral, like it was circling. "Track it," he snapped. Ray jerked the wheel and swept the flood bar left. For one staggered second, the beam caught it clean from ribcage to jaw, before it dropped behind the scrub. Not hide, not skin. Fur. Coarse dark fur matted in burrs and cedar needles, clumped in ropes along a barrel-deep chest. The side of the ribcage flexed under it with a breath so heavy Glenn could hear a wet rasp over the engine. Then the head turned enough for profile. Long snout, almost canine until the mouth line shifted wrong. Lips drawing too far back in a sideways flex that exposed uneven pale teeth, set deeper than a dog's. One forelimb came forward as it dipped, and the end of it was not a paw. It was a hand-shaped structure with long digits, each tipped by curved nails the color of old bone. The beam jumped. Ray had cursed and pulled the wheel too hard. The shape vanished behind scrub oak and limestone outcrop, but not before Glenn caught the eye region in spill light. Raw gray skin around the socket, hairless and inflamed looking, like scar tissue where fur refused to grow. Glenn's body reacted before his mind did. Every muscle locked, then dumped adrenaline so hard his fingertips went numb. His stomach dropped as if he'd stepped off a roof. For a useless heartbeat, he could not inhale. Ray made a sound Glenn had never heard from him. Half gag, half prayer. Jesus Christ. "Go," Glenn said, but his voice came out shredded. He grabbed Ray's arm hard enough to leave marks. "Go now." Ray slammed reverse, clipped a cedar stump, corrected, and shot backward down the lane with floodlights bouncing wild across trunks. Branches scraped the cage. Gravel spit against the undercarriage. Behind them, something crashed once through brush, parallel to their retreat, then stopped exactly at the light edge as if it had hit an invisible line. They burst into open yard and didn't stop until they were beside the fuel tank where sodium lamps pooled strongest. Ray killed the engine and sat gripping the wheel, forehead touching the bar, breathing in short mechanical pulls. Dwayne walked toward them, angry before he got close. "What in hell are you?" He stopped when he saw their faces. "What happened?" he asked, quieter. Glenn climbed out on rubber knees, nearly missed the ground, and pointed toward the east line. "It was there. We lit it up." Dwayne's expression hardened back into skepticism like a door closing. A hog and brush can look big in motion. Hogs don't have hands. Ray flinched at that and spat into the dust, then wiped his mouth with the back of his wrist. I saw something weird, he muttered. Could have been Angle. Glenn turned on him. You saw the nails. Ray wouldn't answer. Dwayne looked between them, decided what version kept the shift moving, and chose it. No more joyrides. Finish your lanes. Glenn laughed once, sharp and joyless. You go finish my lane. Dwayne stepped in close, low voice dangerous. You walk off tonight, you don't come back? For 3 seconds, Glenn considered exactly that. Truck, highway, no more night work, but mortgage math, child support, an old habit held him where fear could not. He went back to the loader with hands still shaking, wrote 2 words in his notebook at 11:37 p.m., saw it, and underlined until the pencil tip snapped. After that night, the line between mill and home stopped, meaning anything. He started finding signs at the trailer that didn't fit chance. The tin and socket trip line he'd rigged behind the trailer was still strung, but the knots were untied, not torn. Each one loosened and dropped so the tins lay silent in the grass. His spare work glove vanished from the porch rail and turned up 2 nights later hanging from the top strand of barbed wire by one finger, 30 yards out at the cedar edge. His 5-gallon water jug, usually by the steps, was found upright at the far corner post, with the cap unscrewed and set neatly beside it. No tracks worth trusting. Just disturbed dust and one long drag mark that began nowhere and ended at the tree line. He replaced a porch bulb and found muddy smears at shoulder height on the siding, where no person had reason to touch. He started closing curtains before full dark and hated himself for it. At the mill, small things shifted too. His thermos went missing from the loader cab and reappeared near the east fence, laid on its side pointing toward the brake. A coil of chain he'd left by the maintenance bay turned up, draped over a dead cedar trunk, exactly where the knocking was loudest. Nothing broken, nothing stolen for value. Just moved, placed. Once, at 2:14 a.m., he found his own notebook on the loader floor, open to the page where he'd drawn the crude silhouette. He was certain he had left it zipped in his lunch bag. 2 faint gray hairs clung to the spiral wire, the same coarse texture as before. He bagged them with shaking hands. Ray changed in quieter ways. He no longer laughed when Dwayne mocked, "Ghost pasture." He stopped taking smoke breaks by the east door. If a task required crossing the far lane, he found a reason to swap. Glenn caught him making the sign of the cross once before climbing into the saw feed station, then pretending to scratch his chest when he noticed Glenn watching. You hear it at your place? Glenn asked him one dawn, both of them too tired to pretend normal. Ray stared at his boots. No? Don't lie to me. Ray's jaw worked. I hear knocks sometimes by my carport. Could be anything. Same pattern? Silence. Yeah, Ray said finally. Same damn pattern. Glenn felt cold in morning heat. He tried to escalate like a sane man would. He called the county non-emergency line and reported repeated nighttime disturbances, possible large predator, property tampering. The dispatcher took the information politely and asked if anyone was injured. No. Any photos of the animal itself? Not clear enough. Any livestock killed? Not yet. She offered to note increased patrol if units were available. None came. He drove 2 bagged hair samples to a feed store bulletin board where a local trapper advertised nuisance removal. The trapper looked at the hairs, rolled them between thick fingers, and said, "Coyote guard hair, maybe. Hard to tell. You got a carcass, I can tell you more." He suggested snares. Glenn pictured setting snares for something that stood eye level with a live oak fork and said nothing. He bought a used trail cam anyway and mounted it on a fence post behind the trailer, angled across the flower-dusted patch. Next morning, the camera held 27 clips. Moths, wind-blown grass, one raccoon at 10:03 p.m., then at 12:42 a.m., 6 seconds of static snow, and a single frame where two red-gold reflections hovered too high in the shot, with no body visible below. At 12:43, the camera faced the ground as if twisted downward by hand. The housing wasn't cracked. The strap was still buckled. He watched that frame once and nearly dropped the camera. He erased everything, and then hated himself again for erasing it. The worst moment came on a Thursday just after midnight when he stepped outside his trailer to urinate before leaving for shift and heard the first 3 knocks from the cedar behind him. He froze mid-step. Before the pause finished, the answering 2 knocks came from farther off, east, toward the mill road. Not echo. Response. As if one thing had called and another had answered. He stood in the dark with his heart hammering, trying to count distance, trying to tell himself terrain carried sound strangely. Then something exhaled in the brush 15 yards to his left, a deep, wet push of air, and he backed into the trailer door so hard he bruised his spine. At work that night, he watched the east line and realized with sudden, humiliating clarity that the pattern tracked him. Knocks near trailer before departure. Knocks at mill after he arrived. Silence whenever he stood still in bright light too long. Impact marks appearing where he had walked the day prior, not random but adjacent, like markers. He was not being haunted, he was being handled, catalogued. A thing in the trees knew his routines, his routes, the places where light ended and where he would step next. The thought settled into him like a nail driven through green wood. Slow, irreversible, impossible to ignore. Pray, something old in him said. He started carrying his grandfather's 30-30 in the truck, though company policy forbade firearms in the yard. He kept it wrapped in a moving blanket behind the seat and told no one. By the time the month's last week turned, Glenn had pared his world down to work, fence checks, and locking doors before sunset. Sleep came in 40-minute bursts, with the fan running high to blur sudden sounds. Even with the fan, knocks threaded through sometimes, and he'd wake with both hands clenched around the sheet like rope. The mill schedule got worse before a shipment deadline. Dwayne pushed overtime, split tasks thinner, and kept men spread across the property instead of clustered. "No standing around," he barked. "If belts are moving, you're moving." On Monday, one of the mill dogs vanished between midnight and 2. Collar found near the scrap pile, buckle bent open. Dwayne called it coyotes and kept production rolling. On Tuesday, Glenn arrived to find the east service gate chain lying in the dirt, link twisted as if torqued with a pry bar. No tool marks on the latch, no tire tracks. Dwayne blamed day crew and told him to rehang it. On Wednesday, Glenn's truck wouldn't start at shift end. Hood up, flashlight between teeth. He found plug wires gnawed in 2 places and a smear of sap or saliva on the battery case. Maybe rats, he told himself. Could have been rats. He sat in the dead truck until daylight and still checked the tree line every 30 seconds. He asked Dwayne for one thing Thursday afternoon. "Keep us paired tonight. Nobody alone east side. Dwayne gave him a long, flat stare. You trying to manage my floor now? I'm trying not to lose another dog. Dwayne's nostrils flared. You scared? Clock out. I need workers, not weather reports. Ray stood nearby pretending to inventory chain binders, saying nothing. At sundown, a dry wind came up from the southwest, warm as breath from an open oven. Cedar pollen hung low enough to haze headlights. By 10 p.m., even the insects had thinned out. The quiet had that padded quality Glenn had come to dread, as if the whole hill country held itself still in anticipation. At 11:08, knocks sounded from the east line. At 11:26 from north of the fuel tank. At 11:41 from behind the maintenance bay where no trees stood close enough to strike. Each sequence was perfect. 3. Pause. 2. Anybody near bay wall? Glenn called over radio. Ray answered immediately. Negative. I'm at saw feed. Dwayne. Quit chasing sounds. Move the cedar stack by Hall Road. Glenn drove the loader to Hall Road anyway, because argument wasted breath. The road ran between log piles and the tree line, a dusty corridor that opened to the service gate at one end and the mill pad at the other. Half moon up. Amber hazard lights rotating on parked equipment threw sweeping bands across dust and trunks, making everything strobe between visible and gone. He didn't like the geometry. Too many blind angles. Too far from the office trailer if things went bad. At 12:03, the mill blade shuddered, then spun down. Silence dropped hard. Ray came over radio. Feed jam. We're idling till I clear it. Copy. Without mill noise, Glenn could hear his own loader engine and the ticking ping of cooling metal from parked trailers. Wind skimmed dust along the Hall Road in thin snakes. He backed near a cedar pile and kept the bucket low, angled toward the tree line like a shield. The knocking came from directly ahead, maybe 30 yards at the edge where moonlight failed. Knock, 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 pause, knock, knock. Closer than ever. Glenn keyed radio. Ray, get out here now. No answer. He tried again. Ray, static. Then Dwayne, faint and clipped. Radio's breaking up. Repeat. Send Ray to Hall Road. Static swallowed the rest. Glenn cursed, grabbed the handheld and climbed down with knees that felt detached from his body. He moved to the loader's front tire, using the machine for cover, scanning tree line and road margins. Dust blew past his boots. No movement. Then a second knock sequence sounded behind him, from the direction of the service gate. Knock, 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 pause, knock, knock. Not echo. Different timbre. Wood on metal this time, ringing hollow. He turned in a full circle, trying to locate both sources, pulse banging in his throat so hard it blurred hearing. Ahead, dark cedar wall. Behind, gate lane. Amber light sweeping across chain link and posts. Ray, he shouted now, radio forgotten. At last the side-by-side engine whined somewhere near the mill pad and grew louder. Ray came into view, flood bar on, face washed chalk white. He braked hard beside the loader. Dwayne says clear the jam, then stack north, Ray said too fast. What's wrong? Glenn pointed toward the service gate. It's back there, maybe 2 of them. Don't say 2. Listen. They did. Wind, engine idle. Then 3 knocks from the trees to their left, close enough to feel through boot soles. Ray whispered, I hate this place. Get in loader cab, Glenn said. What? Now. Ray hesitated, eyes flicking from tree line to gate lane like a trapped animal choosing teeth. Another knock, single this time, sounded on metal behind them. Ray flinched so hard he nearly fell stepping off the side-by-side. They climbed into the loader together, cramped shoulder to shoulder in the cab. Glenn pulled the door shut and locked it, though he knew how thin glass was. He threw the boom up halfway, then paused. Through the front windshield, rotating amber lights washed the Hall Road in bands. Each sweep revealed empty dust, then shadows, then empty again. To the right, the service gate stood partly open. "Did you leave that open?" Glenn asked. Ray stared. No. Neither had touched it. Glenn shoved the transmission into reverse to back toward the mill pad, and the loader jolted, then stopped dead with a metallic slam from behind. He checked mirrors. In the rear camera's grainy view, the lowered chain from the service gate had snagged around the counterweight and rear ladder, pulled taut by the machine's movement like a leash cinching. "Chain caught us," he said. Ray made a strangled noise. "Can you break it?" Maybe not fast. Another knock came, very close now, from somewhere just outside the left floodlight's reach. 3 slow strikes. A pause. 2 more. Glenn's hands tightened on the controls. Ahead was the dark tree line. Behind was a jammed chain and narrow lane. Radio crackled uselessly. Dwayne was out of sight. Ray was shaking beside him. For the first time since this started, Glenn ran out of practical options in one clean instant. There was nowhere left to back up. Glenn kept one hand on the wheel and one on the boom control, breathing through his mouth so he could hear. The chain cinched against the loader's rear frame with each tiny roll, links groaning under tension. Beside him, Ray was whispering, "No, no, no," like a prayer he didn't believe. Another knock sounded from ahead. Not hidden now, clear, hollow, intentional. Knock, knock, knock. Pause, knock, knock. It came with a shape. At first it was only movement in the amber sweep, a mass stepping out of cedar shadow into the pale dust of the Hall Road. Then the rotating hazard lights caught it full, one band of orange after another, and all Glenn's stitched-together explanations tore loose at once. It stood upright when it entered, and upright it was near 9 feet, maybe more. Shoulders wide as a gate panel. Hips narrow under a chest so deep it looked built for lung volume no animal should need. Its spine rose in subtle ridges beneath matted dark fur. Each vertebra hinted when it shifted weight. The ears were flattened so tight to the skull they were almost invisible, only shallow triangles in the fur when the amber light passed. Its face looked assembled from pieces Glenn recognized, and then warped wrong by cruel hands. A long jaw too heavy for the skull. Forehead too short. Muzzle projecting forward but splitting at the mouth corners in a flex no dog or wolf made. Around both eyes the skin was gray, raw-looking, bare of fur, stretched tight and scarred like old burns. The eyes themselves caught light in red gold and moved independently enough to make his stomach drop. One fixed on Glenn, one on Ray, tracking them as separate targets. It lowered in one fluid motion from full height to a knuckle-braced posture, forelimbs absorbing weight without a stumble. The hands, there was no other word, splayed in the dust. Long digits ending in pale hooks that clicked lightly on limestone gravel. It turned half-side to them, reached to a dead cedar snag at the road edge, and struck the trunk with one forelimb. Knock, knock, knock. Pause, knock, knock. Not random, not warning the woods. Demonstration. Ray made a high sound and lunged for the door handle. I'm out! He kicked the door open, got one boot on the step, and froze there, staring as the creature shifted its head and looked right at him. His whole body locked. He neither climbed down nor came back in, just hung in the opening like a man turned to wood. "Ray," Glenn shouted. No response. The creature rocked forward once, a preparatory motion, claws digging furrows in dust. Glenn moved before he thought. He grabbed the back of Ray's reflective vest, hauled him backward with everything he had, and slammed the cab door shut so hard the latch bounced. Ray fell across the seat and hit his temple on the steel frame with a dull crack. Glenn shoved the boom control down and dropped the bucket between them and the road in a fast steel arc. The loader arm hit bottom with a hydraulic thump, bucket edge biting dust like a gate dropping. "Hold on." The creature came anyway. It covered the distance in a blur of low muscle and dark fur and hit the bucket face on. The impact sounded like a truck collision in a shipping container. 30,000 pounds of machine rocked left hard enough to lift a tire. Glenn's shoulder slammed into the doorpost and something popped wetly in his right side. White-hot pain shot through his arm and hand. The windshield starred. Side glass exploded inward. He threw his left hand up and a shard sliced deep across his palm, hot blood slicking the controls. Ray screamed once, then went limp and slid half under the dash. Glenn jammed the horn. Inside the sealed cab, with impact noise still ringing and the horn blaring inches from his face, sound became a physical thing. Pressure and pain. His left ear went sharp, then muffled, then whined like a live wire. He kept the horn down anyway, mashed floodlights to full, and held the beam on the creature's face through the cracked windshield. It recoiled half a step, lips peeling back, eyes narrowing against light. "Look at me, you bastard," Glenn said through gritted teeth, voice shaking. It struck again. This time not at the bucket, but at the arm joint. Claws screeching metal. Deep gouges appeared in fresh paint and steel, as if scored by a grinder. The loader rocked. The chain at the rear snapped taut with a metallic scream. Glenn shoved the transmission forward and floored throttle. The machine surged against the snagged chain, stalled, lurched again. Links stretched, then held. The creature circled left, staying just outside bucket swing, clever as a fighter reading reach. It darted in, slammed one forelimb against the cab side, and the remaining side glass burst inward across Glenn's lap. More cuts stung his forearm. Ray's head bounced against the console. Glenn grabbed the joystick with his bleeding hand and swept the bucket wide to force space. Steel bit into a stacked cedar pile beside the haul road. Logs shifted and spilled. The loader arm shuddered violently. He overcorrected in panic, rammed deeper and felt something tear underneath. Hydraulic line rupture, sudden pressure drop, atomized fluid spraying hot. The torn line hit metal edge and threw sparks. For half a second, nothing happened. Then a blue-orange tongue of flame snapped up from the cedar bark and oily dust, fed by misted hydraulic fluid. Not a firestorm, just a fast, angry flare, but bright enough to throw hard light and heat. The creature flinched back from the sudden flame, head jerking, lips pulling tight. It made a sound Glenn would later fail to describe, part cough, part guttural click, part rage, and shifted its attention to the burning pile. That was the only opening they got. Glenn reversed hard, chain screaming over the rear frame. One link failed with a rifle crack, then another. The loader jumped free so abruptly his dislocated shoulder lit up again and blacked his vision for a beat. He yanked the wheel toward the service gate lane, horn still blaring. floodlights strobing across cedar and smoke. In mirror fragments, he saw the creature pace 2 strides in parallel, then stop at the edge of flame and sweeping light, eyes locked on the cab. Knock, knock, 2 strikes only, on the loader's rear panel this time as they passed, metal ringing through the frame like a bell. Ray moaned and curled tighter, blood at his hairline. The service gate stood half open, bent from earlier chain torque. Glenn didn't slow. He dropped the bucket for balance, lined up on the opening, and rammed through. Gate post splintered, chain link folded, steel shrieked along steel. They burst into the ranch access road beyond and fish-tailed in loose caliche. He drove blind for the first 100 yards, one eye squinting through a windshield webbed with cracks, left ear mostly gone to ringing, right shoulder hanging wrong and useless at his side. Dust and smoke streamed through blown glass. Behind them, no pursuit came into the open road. Only, faint and receding, the pattern followed once from the tree line beyond the gate. Knock, knock, knock. Pause. Knock, knock. Glenn kept the throttle down until the Caldwell Ranch house porch lights appeared between oaks. He should have gone to a hospital first. He knew that even then. Instead, he skidded the wounded loader to a stop in front of the ranch house mudroom, killed the engine, and nearly blacked out when he tried to climb down. His right shoulder hung low, collar twisted. Every step sent stabbing pain through his chest. Blood from his left palm slicked the handrail as he dragged Ray out of the cab. Ray came awake halfway to the porch, dazed and combative. "What? Where?" "House," Glenn snapped. "Move." They stumbled inside through the mudroom door, boots smearing dust and blood on the tile. Glenn shoved the deadbolt, then slid the farm table against the door. Ray, swaying, grabbed a feed barrel and helped wedge it in place. They dragged 2 sacks of cubes and an old chest freezer against the lower panel for weight. "Lights," Glenn said. Ray blinked at him. "Kill every outside light, now." Ray moved by habit, hitting switches down the hall and kitchen, leaving only one dim lamp in the interior room. The house went from welcoming yellow to bunker dark in 10 seconds. Outside, yard lights snapped off one by one until only moonlight silvered the windows. Glenn fetched rifles from the hall cabinet with his good arm. 1.30-30, one old bolt action .308, and handed Ray the bolt gun. Ray took it with shaking hands and sat on the mudroom bench, muzzle toward the blocked door, breathing through his mouth. "You bleeding?" Ray said after a minute, as if noticing Glenn for the first time. "You too." They did crude first aid in silence. Glenn wrapped his palm in dish towels and duct tape. Ray pressed frozen peas to the side of his head and then forgot why he was holding them. Glenn made him sit, checked pupils with a pen light, got a delayed response, and swore under his breath. Concussion, at least. His left ear still whined, and other sounds came through cotton. The horn had done damage, maybe permanent. His right shoulder throbbed and bulged visibly at the joint. He swallowed 2 old pain pills dry and kept the rifle across his knees anyway. They took watches until sunrise, and neither slept. At 2:43 a.m., something hit wood outside once, far off. At 3:10, the dogs that usually barked at raccoons stayed silent. At 3:57, Glenn thought he heard 3 knocks from somewhere past the cattle pens, then maybe 2, but with the ringing ear, he couldn't trust direction. Ray dozed in jerks, woke panicked, asked the same question twice. "Did we get out?" Each time, Glenn answered yes. Each time Ray stared like he didn't believe him. Just before dawn, gray light seeped under the mudroom door. Birds started one by one. First a cardinal, then 2 doves. Then the ordinary morning noise of ranch life returning as if nothing had happened. The normal sounds felt obscene. Glenn stood, dizzy, and looked through the back window blinds with one eye. No movement in the yard. No giant tracks visible from the house. Just the loader parked crooked in the drive, one side caved and scored. Broken glass glittering beneath it. He reached for his phone with his taped hand and dialed the sheriff's office. When dispatch answered, his voice came out flat and too calm. "We had an animal attack on equipment out at the Caldwell Mill Road," he said. "Need a deputy." He did not say how big. He did not say hands. He did not say eyes at 8 feet. 2 deputies arrived just after 7 in separate units. Coffee cups in hand. Uniforms still crisp with morning. One was the seed-chewing pump deputy Glenn had spoken to weeks earlier. The other, younger, carried a camera and wrote everything down in a spiral pad. They walked the loader first. The older deputy whistled low at the damage. "Hell of a collision," he said, crouching by the bucket dents. The younger deputy photographed claw-like scoring down the arm and side panel, each groove long and parallel. "Could be metal-on-metal scrape from debris," he offered. "Debris with fingernails?" Glenn said before he could stop himself. The older deputy gave him a look that was not unkind. "You said animal attack. What animal you think?" Glenn kept his eyes on the dirt. "Something out of the tree line rushed us. Big, fast. Hit the machine." "How big?" Glenn hesitated. In that pause, he saw the whole path ahead if he told the whole truth. Wardens smirking, neighbors gossiping, Dwayne calling him unstable. Every hard-earned thing in his life reduced to a story men laughed at over gas pumps. "Bigger than a dog," he said. "Maybe a hog, maybe not." The deputy nodded as if that made sense. "Anybody drinking on shift?" "No." They photographed broken cedar trunks near the haul road, scorched ground where hydraulic fluid had flashed, twisted gate chain and impact marks on a dead snag consistent with heavy strikes. They measured gouges in loader paint and wrote probable scenarios out loud while they worked. Feral hog collision with secondary equipment panic response, maybe aggravated by low visibility and fatigue. Ray, pale and quiet, sat on the ranch porch with an ice pack and failed to correct any of it. When asked what he remembered, he rubbed his temple and said, "Noise, horn." Then we were at the house. The last half-minute was gone for him, clean blank. EMS checked both men at the house. Glenn's shoulder was confirmed dislocated. They reduced it at the clinic later that day, while he bit a rolled towel and sweated through his shirt. His palm needed stitches. The urgent care doctor told him his left eardrum looked angry and prescribed drops, saying hearing might return some, which turned out to be accurate and not comforting. At noon, the deputies handed him a copy number for the incident report. "Probable feral hog impact. Operator distress response," the older deputy summarized. "No ongoing threat indicated." Glenn signed where they pointed. His notebook sat in his truck glove box through all of it, swollen with sweat and pencil indentations and dates. Nobody asked for it. He did not offer. Part of that was pride. Part of it was fear. Because if someone read those pages and believed him, the next step would be men walking into those same cedar breaks with lights and rifles and confidence. Glenn knew exactly how confidence looked right before it got men killed. He quit nights 2 weeks later in Dwayne's office trailer, while pain still pinched his shoulder with every reach. Dwayne leaned back in his chair, expression already mocking. "You really gonna let one bad incident end your spine?" Glenn set his badge on the desk. "I'm done after Friday." "Because of a hog?" Dwayne smiled without humor. "You've been telling campfire stories so long you believe 'em now." Glenn said nothing. Dwayne tapped the badge. "Sell your contract share, then. I'll find somebody who works in the dark." "Do it," Glenn answered. Paperwork took another 10 days. Signatures at a bank, transfer of equipment stake, final tally that hurt to look at. He took less than he thought he deserved, and more than he expected to get. The new number in his account was enough to keep current, not enough to breathe easy. He moved off the trailer spot before month's end. The rental in Burnett was a narrow duplex on a street with sodium lamps every 100 feet, and neighbors close enough to hear each other's televisions through walls. Glenn hated the constant town noise, sirens, car doors, barking lapdogs. But he signed the lease anyway, because streetlights reached every corner of the parking lot and no cedar break started 20 yards from his bedroom. The first weekend there, he installed reinforced shutters over both bedroom windows and the back slider, bolting brackets into studs until his forearm shook. He mounted motion lights above each entry and 2 trail cams on opposite corners of the small yard. The landlord objected. Glenn paid for repairs up front and did it anyway. When the cams chirped after midnight, he checked timestamps, then deleted footage without opening clips. He told himself this was practical triage. Truth was simpler. He could not afford to see those eyes framed by suburban fencing. Work changed to daylight only. Fence mending for neighboring ranches, feed hauling, odd tractor jobs, lower pay, longer sun hours, no graveyard differential. He learned to live thinner. Ray drifted away almost immediately. They met once at a diner off 1431 for breakfast after Glenn's last mill shift. Ray wore sunglasses indoors and flinched at dropped silverware. "You remember any of it?" Glenn asked quietly over burnt eggs. Ray kept his fork still. "I remember being in the cab, then knocking on metal after the gate, and then your mudroom." He shook his head. "Everything between's gone." "You seeing anybody for that head injury?" Ray gave a tired laugh. "Saw a doc. Said rest and no night driving, like I needed him for that." A week later, Ray texted. "Took mechanic job in Llano. Daylight only. Good luck, brother." After that, replies got sparse. Then none. Marissa watched Glenn's changes with cautious skepticism at first, then relief she tried not to show. At a custody exchange in a grocery parking lot at 10 a.m., her chosen place, always public, always daylight, she handed Eli's backpack over and looked at Glenn's healing palm scar. "You quit nights?" she asked. "Yeah." "For real?" "For real." She exhaled slowly. "Okay. We can add Wednesdays, after school pickup." Then, firm. "Daylight exchanges only, Glenn. No ranch gates, no after dark." "Daylight," he said. Eli grabbed his hand and chattered about frogs and spelling and a science project, and for a few hours Glenn felt almost like a father instead of a witness. Dwayne kept mocking him publicly for months. At the feed store, at the pump, wherever 2 or 3 men could hear. "Ask Glenn about the werehog," he'd call with a grin. Glenn ignored it until one evening in late summer when Dwayne pulled into the co-op lot at dusk, engine idling, hat in both hands. No audience this time. "You still got that notebook?" Dwayne asked without preamble. Glenn studied him. "Why?" Dwayne looked past him toward the road. 2 mill dogs gone this week. Night crew hears knocking by east stacks. Same rhythm you used to yap about. He swallowed. I want to compare times. For a second, Glenn almost pitied him. Then he remembered standing in that office trailer with photos while Dwayne laughed. No, Glenn said. Dwayne frowned. No what? No, you can't have it. Come on, Glenn. You had your chance to listen. Dwayne's jaw hardened. So that's it? You let everybody else walk blind because your feelings got hurt? Glenn stepped closer, voice low. I'm not giving you a map. Dwayne held his stare for a long moment, then put his hat back on and drove away without another word. Glenn watched his taillights until they turned the corner, then went inside and deadbolted the co-op door, though it was still light out. Now, in his early 40s, Glenn's life is built around endings before sunset. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, he teaches chainsaw safety at the county co-op. Stance, kickback zones, wedge placement, first aid tourniquets, the dull practical curriculum he trusts. He starts class at 9 and wraps by 4, even in winter when demand runs high. Daylight only, he tells the coordinator every season. The coordinator jokes that Glenn turns into a pumpkin at dusk. Glenn smiles like it's funny and loads his truck before the parking lot lights click on. He still works seasonal ranch contracts between classes, spring fence line repairs, summer feed runs, fall brush clearing. He keeps his routes logged and avoids east-facing cedar breaks after dark, no matter the pay. At home in Burnett, routines are ritual now. Doors locked before sunset, shutters latched in pollen season, motion lights tested weekly. A fan runs every night by his bed, white noise high enough to blur sudden thuds. If the fan fails, he wakes instantly. On his kitchen table sits a thick handwritten ledger. Not the old mill notebook, he keeps that boxed in a closet, but a new log with columns ruled in black pen. Date, weather, wind, moon phase, wildlife sounds, unusual events. He calls it staying honest. It keeps memory from drifting, keeps fear from rewriting facts. Some entries are ordinary. April 12th, light south wind, coyotes active 10:15 p.m., no anomalies. May 3rd, thunder north, dogs barking at possum, resolved. Some are shorter. May 27th, cedar pollen heavy, insects went silent, 11:41 p.m. Heard 3/2 pattern. Faint from beyond drainage ditch. Locked up. He has never seen the creature again. Not in full, not in part. Not even eyeshine that he can swear to under oath. Years have passed. Men at the mill changed shifts, sold equipment, moved on. The cedar break where it stepped into the Hall Road was partially cleared after a fire season, then grew back thicker. Still, every spring, when cedar pollen hangs low and the hill country quiet falls too fast, Glenn feels the old pressure return under his ribs. Sometimes with the fan off for cleaning or power flickering in a storm. He hears it from somewhere beyond the nearest fence line. Knock, 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 pause, knock, knock, deliberate, patient, unhurried. He does not go outside to confirm it anymore. He checks each lock by hand once. He closes shutters. He leaves the porch dark. Then he sits at the kitchen table, writes the time in his log, and waits for morning with both feet on the floor and his breathing steady, because that is what survival looks like after the story ends. Not victory, not answers. Just a man who learned where the light stops and refuses to stand past it.